In the humid dusk of late July, Crescent Falls, North Carolina, was holding its breath. The air was heavy, as if the whole world were waiting for something to break. Behind Lockwood's Auto Salvage, the rows of abandoned cars shimmered under the orange haze of dying sunlight, their battered bodies and shattered windows catching the last gold of the day. There, among the thistles and buzzing yellow jackets, the silence fractured. A single agonized howl tore across the junkyard, so raw and desperate it made Helen Murphy drop her keys and clutch her chest. Helen, 65, walked with a limp, a souvenir from a lifetime on her feet as a paramedic. And lately she'd been moving slower, as if the weight of her memories had settled in her bones. But tonight, something in that cry cut straight through her aches, yanking her back to the present. She pressed on, shoes crunching over gravel and rusted hubcaps, her breath growing ragged in the thick, syrupy air. As she got closer, the smell of burned oil and wild honey mixed with something darker, fear, pain, a warning. She found the source beneath the twisted skeleton of an old Pontiac. There, half buried in bee-stung grass, was a massive German shepherd. The dog's coat was matted and raw, crawling with angry bees. Her body shuddered with every breath, eyes wide and glassy with panic. All around her, the earth seethed with yellow jackets. Helen's pulse hammered as the memory flashed. Her late husband, Dennis, crumpled on their kitchen floor, lips blue from an allergic shock, the EpiPen too late in her shaking hands. For a moment, Helen froze, her mind caught between the past and the nightmare at her feet. Then she saw movement. Beneath the shepherd's trembling form, half hidden by her body, were 4 wriggling, blood-smeared shapes. Puppies, newborn, slick with birth and fighting for each gasping breath. One of them barely moved, mouth opening in silent protest at the world. Helen's fear warred with her compassion. She knew what bee stings could do, how the venom raced through the body, closing throats, stilling hearts. She took a shaky step forward, her voice cracked and useless. "It's okay, girl, I'm here, it's okay." The shepherd bared her teeth, more in terror than threat. And Helen saw the whites of her eyes, wild, pleading. All around, signs of violence. Rocks and sticks littered the ground, the shattered remains of a hive mixed with glass and splinters. Helen's gut twisted. Someone had done this. Someone had chased this dog, broken the hive, watched the chaos explode. Who could be so cruel? And why? Helen's hands shook as she weighed her options. The hospital was too far. No cell service out here. She'd have to drive. But how could she move the dog and her pups without getting stung herself? The fear of her own allergy clung to her like a second skin. Should she risk her life, or leave them to die in the growing dark? Just as Helen felt herself teeter on the edge of despair, a shadow flickered at the edge of the lot. Small, nimble, determined, someone was coming. Out from behind the hood of a junked pickup stepped a girl, no more than 9 or 10, with tangled hair and a patched blue shirt several sizes too big. She carried a plastic spray bottle and wore a pillowcase tied over her face like a mask, slits cut for her eyes. Without a word, the girl strode up, moving like she belonged here. Bees swarmed at her arms, but she didn't flinch. She knelt by the shepherd, her small hands steady as she spritzed the homemade vinegar mixture into the air. Instantly, the swarm began to scatter. The girl leaned in, whispering soft, urgent words to the dog. "Hold on. Don't go, not yet." Helen stared, stunned, as the child produced a pocket knife and a credit card, scraping stingers from the shepherd's swollen skin. She gathered the whimpering pups, one by one, placing them in Helen's trembling arms. The dog, as if sensing the girl's calm, ceased struggling and only whimpered, eyes locked on her babies. Bees still clung to Helen's sleeve. She bit back a sob as old panic rose. The girl, quick and efficient, shooed them away with a gentle swipe of her shirt. Helen tried to speak, but the words tangled. The girl's eyes met hers through the mask. "You gotta help me. She won't make it alone." Helen nodded, fighting tears. Together they worked, the girl dousing, Helen holding, both of them bathed in sweat and adrenaline. The shepherd, breathing easier now, lifted her head as the last stinger fell free. Finally, the worst of the swarm dispersed, and Helen dared to breathe. "What's your name?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Daisy," the girl replied, eyes never leaving the shepherd. "She's not a monster. She's just scared. Boys come here, throw rocks, call her names. But I've been feeding her. She trusts me. Mostly." Helen's heart ached. The world felt so sharp and mean sometimes. "You did good, Daisy. You saved them." Daisy shook her head. Not yet. At that moment, the distant wail of sirens split the air. Someone had called animal control. Panic flashed in Daisy's eyes. "They'll take her. She'll be put down, maybe. They don't care." Helen's mind raced. Rules, risks, right and wrong all blurring. "We need help. Someone who'll care. The vet, Faulkner. He lives 2 streets over." Daisy nodded, snatching up the limpest puppy, her own face going pale. "We have to go, now!" Helen gathered the other pups, cradling them in her arms as Daisy gently coaxed the shepherd to her feet. Blood and honey smeared their hands, but neither cared. Together, the old woman and the fierce child led the battered dog and her babies out of the junkyard, just as headlights swept across the gravel. Helen flagged down the battered Subaru pulling in. Dr. Neil Faulkner, summoned by luck or fate. As the sirens faded and the stars began to blink in the darkening sky, Helen realized her life was about to change. Again, and maybe, just maybe, for the better. Blue lights flickered against the battered fence as the old Subaru rolled to a stop outside the salvage yard. Helen barely recognized Dr. Neil Faulkner at first. The vet looked older, grayer than she remembered, but his eyes widened with immediate concern the moment he saw the bloody, trembling dog and the bundle of pups clutched tight in Helen's arms. He didn't waste a second. The back of his car became a makeshift triage, supplies scattered across cracked leather seats, the soft hum of country radio at odds with the urgency in the air. Daisy stood beside Helen, her small fists clenched at her sides, pillowcase still tied across her face. "Is she going to die?" The question was barely a whisper, but it sliced through the dark. Helen didn't have an answer. All she could do was watch as Dr. Faulkner and Daisy worked in tandem, an unlikely team, moving with instinct and determination. Sweat beaded on Daisy's brow, and Helen realized just how pale the girl looked. "Are you okay, honey? Those bees..." Before she could finish, Daisy shook her head, stubbornness blazing in her eyes. "I'm allergic too, but I know how to handle it. Got my EpiPen in my bag," Daisy said, voice trembling. "I wasn't going to leave her. Not after what they did." The admission hung between them, heavy and raw. Dr. Faulkner, overhearing, gave Daisy an approving nod. "You did right. Not many would be that brave." He handed Daisy a roll of gauze. "Here, hold this for me. I'll need you." Together they set to work. The air was thick with fear and the heady sweetness of bee venom. Daisy knelt beside Valor, whispering soft encouragements. Helen marveled at how the giant shepherd, still half crazed with pain, calmed at the sound of the girl's voice. "Hold on. Don't go," Daisy murmured, her hands moving gently over Valor's swollen skin. She scraped away the last stubborn stinger with her pocket knife, her motions quick and practiced. Helen watched, feeling suddenly small and helpless, as Daisy's composure never wavered. It was almost unnatural, the kind of focus you see in people who've survived too much, too soon. "She's been feeding this dog," Helen said softly to Dr. Faulkner as he checked each shivering pup. "Knows her better than anyone." The vet nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Some kids," he muttered, "they carry more than we know." In the swirl of headlights and sirens, Daisy finally allowed herself a breath. She glanced up at Helen, her face streaked with grime and determination. "She's not mean, you know. The boys come around, call her a monster, throw things. I tried to scare them off, but they laugh. Say I'm crazy for caring about a stray." There was a tremor in Daisy's voice, a hint of something deeper, older than her years. Helen squeezed her shoulder. "You're not crazy. You're the bravest person here." For the first time, Daisy's expression softened, pride flickering beneath exhaustion. Suddenly, the bark of a radio crackled, animal control, finally pulling up at the edge of the lot. Helen's stomach twisted. She knew their reputation. By the book, no nonsense, not much for second chances. Daisy seemed to shrink as the officers approached, flashlights scouring the scene. "You folks called about a dangerous animal?" the officer asked, one hand resting on a heavy flashlight. He eyed Valor, battered and bleeding, with professional suspicion. Helen stood straighter, heart pounding. "She's hurt, not dangerous. Some kids did this. We're trying to save her." The officer frowned, glancing at Daisy, then at the pups. "Still, protocol says," but Dr. Faulkner cut in, his voice steely. "I'm taking her and the puppies to my clinic. If you have a problem, you can call the sheriff, but I'm not letting them die here while you argue policy." There was a tense pause. Helen thought the moment might explode, but Daisy suddenly stepped forward, hands shaking but voice clear. "Please, she didn't bite anyone. She was just protecting her babies. The boys, they were throwing rocks." Something in Daisy's plea must have reached the officer. He relented, gruffly muttering about paperwork and liability. "Fine, but you keep me updated, Doc. And that dog's got to stay under quarantine until we're sure she's not rabid." Dr. Faulkner nodded, shepherding everyone into his car. As they pulled away, Helen glanced back at the flashing lights and broken glass, the junkyard returning to silence. Daisy rode in the back with Valor's head in her lap, humming quietly, her fingers buried in the dog's fur. They reached the tiny vet clinic just as the sky bled fully into night. The neon sign buzzed, casting blue shadows across the parking lot. Inside, the sterile scent of antiseptic and hope mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Helen carried the limpest pup inside, cradling it as if it were her own heart. Daisy helped Valor onto the exam table, her jaw set in a determined line. Dr. Faulkner worked quickly, cleaning wounds, starting IVs, examining each puppy in turn. One was barely breathing, a runt, smaller than the rest, with a faint, fluttering pulse. Daisy hovered, her face white as the clinic walls. When Faulkner finally looked up, his face grave, Daisy sagged against the counter, eyes brimming. "Will he make it?" The vet hesitated. "He's got a chance, but it's going to be a long night." Daisy nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll stay. I'll help." Helen sat beside her, the old woman's hand finding the girls in a silent promise. That night, while the world outside spun on, Helen and Daisy kept vigil by Valor and her pups. The first, fragile threads of trust began to weave between the old woman, the girl, and the wounded dog. 3 souls, each battered in their own way, refusing to give up. Night pressed in tight around Dr. Faulkner's small veterinary clinic, the only lights for miles coming from the glowing windows and the red numbers blinking on a coffee-stained wall clock. Inside, the air was sharp with the bite of antiseptic, but Helen barely noticed. She paced between the cramped waiting chairs and the exam room, trying to shake off the ache in her hip and the ache in her heart. Every few minutes, she looked through the window into the back room, where Daisy and Dr. Faulkner worked over Valor and her puppies. Each glance brought back flashes of her own ambulance days, sirens in the night, life balanced on the edge, the helplessness that haunted her long after the emergencies ended. Daisy sat on a low stool beside Valor's table, eyes fixed on the shuddering shepherd. She didn't flinch as Dr. Faulkner cleaned wounds and plucked out lingering stingers, though the old man's hands worked fast and sure. Daisy's only movements were gentle strokes along Valor's jaw, her lips moving in a quiet rhythm, promising safety, urging the dog to hold on. One puppy, the runt with a feeble heartbeat, barely moved at all. Daisy scooped him up, pressing him against her own cheek, whispering fiercely, "Stay with me, please." Helen's chest tightened. She recognized that kind of fight. It was what had kept her going through 1,000 impossible shifts, what had let her keep breathing after Dennis died. She remembered Daisy's words back at the junkyard. They called her a monster, but she's just scared. Helen saw now that the same was true of the girl. Both Daisy and Valor seemed to carry the world's wounds right in their bones, and still, they refused to quit. It was well past midnight when Dr. Faulkner set down his tweezers and finally sighed. "That's the worst of it. Valor's tough. She'll make it through, with some luck and rest." He looked at the runt, still limp in Daisy's hands. "He's got a chance, but I won't lie to you, honey. It's not a good one." Daisy bit her lip, blinking hard. Helen crossed the room and put her hands on Daisy's thin shoulders. The girl barely registered the comfort, too focused on the fragile life cradled in her hands. Dr. Faulkner gave Helen a look that said it all. Sometimes the only thing left to do was hope. Helen pulled up a chair and let herself finally sit, knees cracking. Daisy, eyes red-rimmed but dry, settled in next to Valor's crate, the dog's head resting on her lap through the bars. The rest of the puppies snuggled together on a pile of old towels, shivering but alive. Helen marveled at the dog's resilience, at the girl's too. She saw the way Valor, even half-conscious, pressed her nose against Daisy's palm. A silent exchange, "Thank you, I'm still here." Hours passed in a blur of half-sleep and whispered encouragements. Helen couldn't help but notice how Daisy kept sneaking looks at the dog food on the shelf, eyes hungry in more ways than one. Finally, when Dr. Faulkner left the room to fetch some water, Helen broke the silence. "You did good tonight, Daisy. I never saw anyone your age handle themselves like that." Daisy shrugged, not meeting her eyes. I just didn't want them to die," she mumbled. "Sometimes I give Valor my lunch. The other kids say it's stupid, but she needs it more." Helen's heart twisted. "Don't you get enough to eat at home?" Daisy's silence told her everything. Helen reached over and pressed a granola bar into Daisy's hand. "You need to take care of yourself too. It's not just the dog." For a moment, Daisy didn't move. Then she tore off the wrapper and devoured the bar in 2 bites. Helen felt her own tears threatening again, but she kept her voice steady. "I lost my husband a few years ago. Sometimes it feels like I'm just patching holes in my own heart." She hesitated, choosing her words. "You got people looking out for you, Daisy?" The girl shrugged. "I got a foster mom. She's okay, but there's a lot of us. Sometimes dinner's just a sandwich. I like being out with the animals better." Helen wanted to rage at the world, at all the broken things adults should have fixed but never did. She looked at Dr. Faulkner, who was quietly listening from the doorway, sadness in his tired eyes. Would you mind if Valor and the puppies came home with me for a while? Helen asked gently. Just until they're back on their feet. And maybe you could visit whenever you want. Daisy's eyes widened. For a second, Helen saw the child beneath the armor, a little girl desperate for something to hope for. Really? You'd let me? Helen smiled, warm and genuine. I'd like that. I think Valor would too. Dr. Faulkner nodded approval. That'll be good for everyone. I'll come by and check on them. And Daisy, don't be a stranger. We could use some extra hands around here. As dawn crept through the windows, Helen found a blanket and let Daisy curl up on a mat beside Valor's crate, her small hand reaching through the bars to rest against the dog's muzzle. Helen watched them both drift into sleep, child and animal, both battered, both breathing, both alive because they'd found each other in the ruins of a junkyard night. As the first birds sang outside and the sun painted the sky pink, Helen made herself a quiet promise. She would not let this girl go hungry or unnoticed again. Valor and her puppies were safe for now, and so was Daisy. The cottage would be a sanctuary, for as long as they needed it. For the first time in years, Helen felt hope, thin and tremulous, but real, begin to bloom inside her chest. In that fragile quiet, surrounded by the exhausted bodies of the rescued, she let herself believe that broken things could be mended, and that maybe, just maybe, she was finding her family again. Morning found Helen's cottage shrouded in gentle quiet, save for the slow creak of rocking chairs on the porch and the distant trill of wrens in the budding magnolia. Helen awoke with stiff joints and a heart lighter than it had been in years. The sun painted gold across her tidy living room, where the aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the subtle, sweet scent of puppy breath. Valor, her wounds cleaned and stitched, rested on a thick comforter beside the fireplace, her sides rising and falling with the deep sleep of the truly exhausted. 5 puppies sprawled beside her, round bellies rising, a living heap of hope. Daisy was there too, curled up with one arm flung across the dog's neck, her dark hair wild against a throw pillow. She'd refused to go home the night before, and Helen hadn't pressed. Instead, she'd called Daisy's foster mother and explained, carefully, gently, that Daisy would be safe with her for a few days, helping a wounded animal heal. The woman's voice on the other end was distracted, almost relieved. Helen understood. Some wounds went deeper than the flesh. She busied herself making oatmeal and scrambled eggs, humming an old tune under her breath. When Daisy shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed but alert, Helen set a plate in front of her without a word. Daisy hesitated, then dug in, eating fast but polite, never once asking for seconds, though Helen pressed a warm biscuit into her hand anyway. After breakfast, they returned to the den. Valor stirred, eyes alert but cautious, her gaze following Daisy's every move. The dog's tail thumped weakly as Daisy settled beside her, whispering gentle nonsense and letting the puppies crawl up her lap. Helen watched from the doorway, heart swelling at the sight. A girl who had never been allowed to keep anything of her own, now offering every ounce of love to these small, trembling lives. The morning unfolded in slow rhythms, cleaning wounds, changing bandages, coaxing Valor to lap chicken broth from a bowl. Daisy worked with a soft determination, her hands steady and her voice low. She told Valor stories about her school, how the other kids laughed at her for reading animal books instead of playing games, how the teachers sometimes forgot her name. She described favorite library visits and afternoons spent watching rabbits dart under the church steps. Helen listened from the kitchen, the girl's voice a song of loneliness and longing. Later, Helen joined them on the floor, gently running her fingers through Valor's fur. She told Daisy about her own daughter. how she'd lost her in a car accident years before. The grief had almost broken her. She'd learned to hide the pain, to fill her days with small rituals and quiet kindness. But it was always there, waiting in the quiet. Now, watching Daisy with the pups, Helen felt that old ache soften. Something new was growing in its place, an invitation to care again, no matter the risk. Daisy, listening intently, reached out and took Helen's hand, squeezing it tight. "It hurts to lose someone, but you can still love again, right?" she asked, voice thin but hopeful. Helen smiled, blinking away tears. "I think so, sweetheart. Maybe that's what all this is about, finding something to care for, even after you've been hurt." By midday, Dr. Faulkner arrived with supplies and gentle instructions. Valor lifted her head as he entered, eyes wary but calm. He knelt beside her, checking stitches and hearts with the practiced tenderness of a man who'd seen every kind of suffering. "She's healing," he said softly, "but it'll take time. She'll need quiet and lots of gentle care." He looked at Daisy. "You're welcome at the clinic any time, Daisy. We could use someone with your heart." Daisy glowed at the compliment, her cheeks coloring for the first time since Helen had met her. She looked at Helen, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Is it really okay if I come here? I've never had a pet. Never been allowed to love anything that much." Helen squeezed her shoulder. "You're welcome here, as much as you want. Valor and the puppies need you. I think I do too." That afternoon, they worked together to clean Valor's wounds, change bedding, and make a list of what the puppies would need. Daisy proved endlessly patient, soothing the more anxious pups, inventing names for each one: Shadow, Pip, Scout, Pepper, and Tiny Pep, the runt with the fragile heart. She talked to them as she worked, making up wild stories about their future adventures. Helen laughed more than she had in months, finding herself swept up in Daisy's quiet hope. Sometimes, though, Helen saw the fear return to Daisy's eyes, a flinch when the phone rang, or when a car idled outside too long. The girl's stories would falter, her hand going still in Valor's fur. Helen understood those ghosts too well. She didn't push, only sat nearby, offering her presence as a silent anchor. As the sun sank and the first stars blinked on, Daisy helped Helen close up the house. She checked locks twice, peered out windows, then curled up beside Valor once more. Helen sat in her favorite rocking chair, knitting in her lap, watching over them. The room glowed with quiet promise, a small family forming, each member a little braver than the day before. By nightfall, the cottage felt transformed. Not just a house, but a sanctuary. Dr. Faulkner promised to return every few days. Helen started jotting down questions about animal care, about Daisy's world. Daisy, shy but growing in confidence, asked Helen to show her how to cook oatmeal and tie perfect bandages. The puppies slept tangled together in a heap of hope. For the first time in a long while, Helen allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future. One not built on loss, but on choosing to love again and again. The early days of healing settled over Helen's cottage like the warmest quilt, slow, steady, and hopeful. Every day brought tiny victories. Valor's coat grew glossier, her wounds closing over in pale, healthy scars. The puppies found their voices, filling the house with eager yips and the clumsy tumble of small paws on wood floors. Daisy's visits became a ritual. Sometimes she would come straight from school, still wearing her worn-out sneakers and too big backpack, her eyes lighting up the moment she crossed the threshold. But in Crescent Falls, old prejudices festered just beneath the town's polite smiles. Word had gotten around about the dog attack, about Helen taking in strays, about Daisy's late-night presence at the cottage. Some people were curious, most didn't care, but a handful eyed Helen's home with suspicion. In a small southern town, anything that broke the rules of quiet order drew attention. It started with whispers, casual gossip at the grocery store, sideways glances at the post office. Helen shrugged them off. She'd weathered worse, and besides, she had work to do. The pups needed baths, Valor needed gentle walks along the shaded lanes, and Daisy needed a safe space to just be herself. But then, one Monday evening, as Helen brought in the recycling bin, she saw it. Spray painted across her back fence in dripping red letters, "Monster Dog, Go Home." The words screamed from the weathered boards, cruel and stark. For a moment, Helen's legs nearly gave out. Rage, sadness, and old, familiar fear surged up inside her. She called Daisy, who arrived 20 minutes later, her face tight with worry. The girl traced the letters with her finger, silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "It's them, the boys from my street, the ones who threw rocks at Valor." Her shoulders hunched. "I shouldn't have come here so much. I brought trouble." Helen knelt beside her, pulling Daisy into a fierce hug. "Don't you say that. The only people bringing trouble are the ones who did this. You saved lives, Daisy. This is on them, not you." That night, Daisy insisted on sleeping beside Valor. Helen left the porch light burning, watching shadows shift across the yard. She remembered a time long ago when she and Dennis had felt completely safe in this town. That world felt far away now. She checked the locks twice, then 3 times before going to bed. The next day, the tension grew thicker. Mrs. Kellerman, Helen's neighbor, knocked on the door with a worried frown. "Helen, I found this in my backyard," she said, holding up a poisoned can of tuna, half-eaten and reeking of chemicals. "And my cat, Tigger, he's missing." Her eyes darted toward the sound of puppies yipping inside. "I don't think it's safe here anymore. For any of us." Helen's hands shook as she took the can. "I'm so sorry, Mary. If there's anything I can do." Mrs. Kellerman sighed. "Just watch out. Not everyone in Crescent Falls likes strays, or folks who stick up for them." The words weighed heavy. That evening, as Daisy sat quietly feeding Pep, the smallest puppy, Helen saw fear flicker in the girl's eyes. "Maybe they'll come for us next," Daisy whispered. "Maybe they'll hurt Valor again. Or you." Helen reached across the kitchen table, taking Daisy's hand. "You know what I think? I think you're the bravest kid I've ever met. But you shouldn't have to be brave alone." She paused, considering her next words. "These boys, I know who they are. The Harrisons. Their father owns half the rental houses in town. Folks are scared to cross them." Daisy bit her lip, tears glistening in her lashes. "I just want to help, but it feels like everywhere I go, I make things worse." Helen shook her head. "You make things better, but it's not enough to just take care of the wounded. Sometimes you have to let people see what's really happening." She sat back, the decision settling into her bones. "We should tell the truth, not just to animal control, but to everyone. I'll call Dr. Faulkner. Maybe we can organize a meeting, get the neighborhood together. People need to see what happened. To Valor, to you. Maybe if they understand, they'll help." Daisy hesitated, but then nodded. "I'll do it. But I want to show them, not just tell. I took pictures, of Valor's wounds, the broken hive, the puppies when they were barely breathing. Maybe if they see it, they'll believe me." Helen squeezed her hand, pride shining through her worry. "That's exactly right. Sometimes you have to shine a light on the darkness." That night, the phone rang twice, once from Dr. Faulkner, who promised to stand by them, and once from Deputy Sanchez, who'd heard about the vandalism. "We're watching the area, Helen, but you know how it is. Some folks don't want to see the truth." His words echoed in Helen's chest long after she hung up. The next day, Daisy printed out her photos at the library. She arranged them on Helen's dining table, hands shaking but eyes fierce. Each image told a story: the dog cowering beneath a rain of rocks, the venom-swelled puppies, Daisy's own small hands bandaging wounds no child should ever have seen. Helen looked at the girl across the table. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. Daisy nodded. "I have to be." Outside, a summer storm gathered on the horizon, thunder rumbling like the hearts of those who'd suffered too long in silence. Inside, hope flickered brighter than fear. Helen, Daisy, and Valor, wounded but unbroken, prepared to confront the shadows that had haunted their town for far too long. The storm broke on Friday night, washing Crescent Falls in torrents that rattled gutters and turned dirt roads into shallow streams. Helen sat at her kitchen table, listening to the thunder as she dialed neighbors, left voicemails, and urged them to come to the community hall on Saturday. By dawn, the sky had cleared, leaving the world scrubbed and strangely hopeful. Still, Helen's nerves buzzed. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, hair wild, worry lines deepening, but eyes sharper than they'd been in years. Daisy arrived early, clutching her folder of photographs to her chest, face pale but determined. Helen met her at the door with a mug of cocoa and a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, honey," she said. "We're in this together." They walked to the community hall beneath a sky streaked with sunlight and leftover clouds. The building, usually used for potlucks and voting days, felt different now, charged with something unspoken. Inside, the chairs filled up with townsfolk, some curious, others grim. Dr. Faulkner stood at the front, arms crossed. Even Sheriff Miller, broad-shouldered and skeptical, made an appearance. In the back row, the Harrison boys slouched beside their father, faces hard, trying to look bored. Helen saw Mrs. Kellerman, eyes red from crying, and the rest of the neighbors gathered in tense knots. Helen took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, voice steady. "Thank you all for coming. We're here because of something that happened in our own backyard, a cruelty most folks would rather not see. But if we keep looking away, it'll just keep happening." She nodded at Daisy, who rose with trembling hands and began to lay out the photographs, one by one, on the table at the front. Each image was a story: a dog beaten and swarmed by bees, puppies fighting to breathe, Daisy's thin arms holding them close. The room fell silent except for the soft sniffs and shifting feet. "Her name is Valor," Daisy said quietly, voice wavering but strong. "She was called a monster, but she was just scared. I watched the boys throw rocks at her, and when I tried to help, they laughed at me, but I couldn't walk away." Helen moved to stand beside Daisy, putting a steady hand on her back. What happened to Valor and her puppies wasn't just an accident. It was the result of fear, of cruelty, and of people thinking nobody would care enough to stop them. Dr. Faulkner cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. "I've seen a lot in my years as a vet, but this was different. I want you all to know, the only reason Valor and those puppies survived was because a little girl cared enough to act. But she shouldn't have had to do it alone." All eyes turned to the Harrisons. One of the boys, Lucas, freckles stark on his pale face, shifted in his chair. His jaw worked, and finally he blurted, "We didn't mean for the bees to get so bad. We just thought it was funny. Dad said it was just a stray." Nobody cared. His voice cracked on the last words, shame blooming across his cheeks. The room tensed. Mr. Harrison bristled, ready to deny, but Sheriff Miller raised a hand for quiet. "We're not here to start a witch hunt," he said, voice calm but firm. "We're here to face what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again." Helen looked out at her neighbors. "We've all ignored things we shouldn't have. Maybe we thought they weren't our problem, or maybe we just didn't want to get involved. But Daisy reminded us, compassion takes courage, and change starts at home." A deep silence followed. Then Mrs. Kellerman stood, holding the collar of her missing cat. "If we don't take care of the least among us, dogs, cats, or kids, what kind of town are we?" Dr. Faulkner addressed the sheriff directly. "There needs to be real consequences, not just for the boys, but for everyone who turned a blind eye." Sheriff Miller nodded. "Here's what I propose. The boys will do community service at the vet clinic, helping take care of animals, learning what it means to heal instead of hurt. We'll set up a new animal protection fund, run by folks who've shown they care, like Helen and Dr. Faulkner. And as for Daisy, her foster situation will be reviewed. She's done more for this town than most adults ever have." Murmurs swept through the crowd, some grumbling, others approving. Daisy looked up at Helen, wide-eyed and stunned. Helen bent low, voice soft but fierce. "You're not invisible anymore, sweetheart. Not here." Lucas's mother wiped away tears, crossing the aisle to hug Daisy. "I'm sorry, honey, truly." The meeting stretched on as plans were laid. How to raise money, who would help, how to teach the next generation that kindness mattered. By the time the last chair was stacked and the last neighbor had left, Crescent Falls felt a little less broken. Outside, Daisy and Helen stood beneath the new-washed sky. Daisy gripped Helen's hand, shaking but proud. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I'm glad we told the truth." Helen hugged her tight. "That's how you heal a town, Daisy. One brave truth at a time." As they walked home, Valor and the puppies waiting for them, Helen glanced at the girl by her side and realized something. In a world full of scars, sometimes the smallest hands could do the greatest mending. The weeks after the town meeting brought a change that Helen could feel in the air. Neighbors who had never waved before now paused at her gate, dropping off bags of dog food or boxes of old towels. Dr. Faulkner's clinic filled with new volunteers, some eager, some awkward, but all learning that kindness took more than talk. Daisy became something of a local hero. Teachers asked her to speak at school assemblies. People wanted to pet Valor, who, for all her scars, had started to wag her tail when approached gently. But healing, Helen knew, wasn't a straight line. On a crisp Saturday morning in September, while she was cleaning up breakfast dishes and humming along to the radio, she heard Daisy call out from the living room, a tone that cut right through the usual chaos of puppy yelps and clattering paws. "Helen, Pep's not breathing right." Helen dropped the dish towel and hurried in. Daisy sat cross-legged on the rug, cradling the runt in trembling hands. Pep's chest fluttered like a trapped bird, each breath a struggle, eyes glazed and dull. Helen's heart skipped. "Let me see," she murmured, fighting the old paramedic's panic that threatened to rise. Pep's gums were pale, body limp. Daisy's face was a mask of worry and determination. "He was fine last night," Daisy whispered. "He ate, he played. But now—" "Get the car," Helen said, voice low and steady. "We're going to Faulkner's. Now." They drove fast, windows fogging from anxious breaths. Dr. Faulkner met them at the door, ushering them into the sterile back room. He ran gentle hands over Pep's tiny body, listening with a stethoscope. The waiting was unbearable. Daisy paced the tiled floor, wringing her hands, while Helen sat stiff in a metal chair, the ache in her hip forgotten. After a long, tense silence, Dr. Faulkner looked up. "He's got a congenital heart defect," he said softly. "I suspected, but hoped I was wrong. It's why he's always been smaller, tired faster. He's in crisis now." Daisy's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "What can we do?" Faulkner hesitated. "He needs surgery. There's a specialist in Raleigh, expensive and no guarantees." Helen knew the look in his eyes. He'd seen this before. Seen families forced to choose between their savings and a loved one's life. She glanced at Daisy, saw the girl's world crumbling, and made her decision before she could even think about regret. "I'll pay," Helen said, her voice shaking but firm. "We'll find the money. Do whatever you can, Neil." Daisy clung to Pep, whispering, "Hold on. Please, little guy. You're a fighter." Faulkner gave them hope. A small dose of oxygen, medicine to stabilize Pep for the drive. The hours that followed were a blur. Phone calls, paperwork, the rush to the city. Daisy never let go of the puppy, even as she drifted in and out of sleep in the back seat, her chin resting on her knees. At the animal hospital in Raleigh, everything felt too bright, too clinical. Pep was whisked away, leaving Daisy with empty arms. Helen wrapped her close, the two of them watching as the doors swung closed behind the surgical team. In the waiting room, Daisy curled into Helen's side. "Do you think he'll make it?" Helen swallowed hard, hating to offer false hope. "He's got a better chance now than he did before you gave him that." Daisy nodded, but Helen could see the guilt brewing behind her eyes. "I should have noticed sooner. I should have," her voice cracked. "I was saving up for his food, but I stopped taking my asthma medicine to do it. I thought if I just stretched it a little, nobody would know." Helen turned Daisy's face to hers, fierce and gentle all at once. "You are not alone anymore. You don't have to give up your own health to save someone else." For the first time, Daisy let herself cry. Quiet tears that spilled over and soaked Helen's shirt. Helen held her close, promising silently that she'd never let this girl slip through the cracks again. After the surgery, the vet emerged, mask pulled down, fatigue written in every line. "He made it through. It's up to him now. He'll need time and medication, but he has a chance." Daisy sobbed openly, relief and exhaustion mingling in every breath. Helen thanked the doctor, slipping into the office to settle the bill. She emptied her savings account, not caring about the numbers, knowing some things couldn't be counted in dollars. That evening, back at the cottage, Daisy sat quietly, her head on Helen's shoulder, as Valor lay at their feet. The phone rang. It was Dr. Faulkner calling to check on Pep and to tell Helen that word was spreading about Daisy's situation. "A few of us started a collection for Daisy's care," he said, "and I called the social worker. She'll be getting a visit, maybe a real shot at a better foster placement or even something more permanent." Helen's heart swelled with gratitude, but also with anger for what had been missed. She promised herself she'd fight for Daisy as fiercely as she'd fought for Pep. That night, Daisy curled up in Helen's bed, Valor at their feet. The cottage, once so quiet and lonely, was alive with the sound of hope. Thin maybe and battered, but strong enough to carry them all through the darkness. The world outside Helen's cottage seemed to glow brighter in the wake of Pep's recovery. Each morning, the house was filled with gentle commotion. Puppies tumbling over one another, Valor watching with serene eyes, and Daisy always first awake, making sure Pep got his medicine before slipping him scraps from her toast. Pep's breathing was still uneven, his steps wobbly, but with Daisy's unwavering attention and Helen's steady hands, the runt began to thrive in ways that surprised even Dr. Faulkner. Neighbors stopped by more often, leaving donations or homemade casseroles. Children from Daisy's school rode their bikes up the lane, peeking through the gate to catch a glimpse of the miracle puppy. The town's animal protection fund grew steadily, and Helen found herself invited to chair committee meetings at the church. Her once lonely cottage transformed into a hub of healing, learning, and laughter. But not every change was easy. One bright October afternoon, as leaves blazed gold and red across Crescent Falls, a knock sounded at the door. A heavy, deliberate knock that sent Valor's ears twitching and Daisy's face draining of color. Helen answered to find a tall, hollow-eyed man on the porch, wearing a faded flannel shirt and a wariness that seemed older than his years. "Ma'am," he said, removing his cap and twisting it in his hands. "Name's John Porter. I'm Daisy's father." The world seemed to narrow and sharpen around those words. Daisy froze, eyes wide, mouth suddenly dry. Helen's heart lurched, remembering all the things Daisy had shared, her longing, her disappointments, the wounds that didn't always show. John looked past Helen to his daughter, hesitating in the doorway. "Social worker called me. Said you've been through a lot, kiddo. They're saying you should come live with me again, over in Winston. Got a new job, new place." For a long moment, the house was silent except for the faint whimpers of the puppies. Daisy stared at the floor, then at Helen, her face a mask of confusion and longing. I'm happy here, Dad. I have Valor, I have Pep, I have friends. I want to stay." John's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "It's not that easy, Daisy. The state says—" He glanced at Helen, eyes tired and honest. "Look, I know I messed up before. I'm trying to do better now. But I can't just leave you here. Not if they say you belong with me." Helen saw the storm brewing inside Daisy. Hope battling fear, old wounds scraping against new dreams. She knelt in front of the girl, taking both of her trembling hands. "Whatever happens, Daisy, you are loved. You belong with people who want the best for you. We'll fight for that, I promise." But Daisy shook her head, tears starting to fall. "Please, Dad. Please let me stay. I belong here, with Valor, with Helen, with all of them." Her words came out in a rush, desperate but clear. "I finally feel safe." John looked away, his shoulders slumping. "You don't make this easy, kid." At that moment, Valor padded over and pressed her big head against Daisy's side, as if she understood every word. Helen saw something shift in John's eyes, a recognition of how deep the bond ran, how much healing had happened in this battered old house. The next days were a blur of meetings, social workers, deputies, neighbors coming to vouch for Daisy, for Helen, for the family they'd built out of brokenness. Dr. Faulkner spoke at the hearing, explaining all Daisy had done for Valor and the puppies. Mrs. Kellerman told the story of Daisy's courage at the town meeting. Even the Harrison boy's mother came forward, her sons standing awkwardly by her side, to admit the change Daisy had sparked in them. At the courthouse, Daisy stood before a judge, Helen at her side. She wore her best dress, really just a sweater and skirt borrowed from Helen, and spoke for herself with a trembling but determined voice. "I know I'm just a kid. I know my dad's trying. But I have a family here too now. People who love me. People I can help, and who help me." The judge listened quietly, then asked John to speak. Daisy's father looked down at his hands, then across at his daughter. "She's right, Your Honor. I ain't been the best dad. But I want her to have what she never had before. A real home. Whether it's with me or with folks who care about her. I can't take that away from her." With tears shining in her eyes, the judge ruled that Daisy could stay with Helen as her legal guardian, at least until things changed for her father. Cheers broke out in the gallery, and Daisy collapsed into Helen's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Afterward, the town honored Daisy at a special gathering in the church hall. The mayor presented her with a certificate of bravery, and Dr. Faulkner announced a new mentorship program for kids interested in animal care. Daisy, the very first to sign up. Valor wore a bright blue ribbon around her neck, and even Pep managed a feeble bark of excitement. That night, as Helen tucked Daisy into bed, the girl looked up with shining eyes. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "Can we really be a family now?" Helen kissed her forehead, heart swelling with fierce pride. "Yes, sweetheart. You chose us, and we chose you. That's what makes us a family. Not blood, just love." Outside, autumn leaves danced on the breeze. Inside, for the first time in a long while, everyone felt completely, perfectly home. Fall in Crescent Falls arrived in soft gold and slow rains, as if the town itself needed time to recover. At Helen's cottage, life adopted a quieter, more reflective rhythm. Daisy's new routine meant homework at the kitchen table, Pep curled up in her lap, Valor napping at her feet. Helen, for the first time in years, found herself baking for pleasure rather than out of habit, filling the house with the scent of apples and cinnamon. On Sunday afternoons, after the rush of church and errands, Helen and Daisy would walk the puppies along the leaf-littered lanes, watching sunlight flicker through the branches. People would wave from porches, their smiles easier now, as if the story of the girl and her dog had softened something in the town's bones. It was on one such afternoon, beneath a canopy of crimson maples, that Daisy asked the question that had been blooming in her mind for weeks. "Helen, why do you think people are so scared of what they don't understand?" Helen looked down at her, considering. "I think sometimes people mistake pain for danger. When they see something wounded, they worry it'll lash out, so they protect themselves first. But the truth is, most of us are just scared, and it's easier to turn away than to open your heart and take a risk." Daisy nodded, staring at the muddy paws of the puppies. "I used to feel invisible, like if I disappeared, nobody would notice. But when Valor needed me, and the puppies needed me, I started to feel real, like maybe I mattered, even if it was just to them." Helen reached out, tucking a stray curl behind Daisy's ear. "You matter to more people than you think, sweetheart. It's funny how helping someone else can remind you that you're needed too." That evening, as rain pattered gently on the windows, Daisy pulled out the gratitude journal her school counselor had given her. She wrote quietly for a while, then read aloud, "I'm grateful for Valor for trusting me, Pep for fighting so hard, Helen for being my real family, the town for learning how to care, the Harrison boys for saying sorry, Dad for letting me choose." Helen smiled, a familiar ache, once only grief, now softened by hope, swelling in her chest. She remembered Dennis's words, spoken long ago when their daughter was small. "Sometimes you choose your family, sometimes it finds you." How true those words felt now. The next day, Helen attended the first official meeting of the Crescent Falls Animal Welfare League. As chair, she looked out at a room full of neighbors, young and old, all eager to volunteer for something bigger than themselves. The Harrison boys were there, faces sheepish but determined, ready for their first day of community service at Dr. Faulkner's clinic. Mrs. Kellerman ran the bake sale table, her lost cat memorialized with a small photo and a bowl of treats for adopted animals. Dr. Faulkner stood to speak. "This league isn't just about protecting dogs and cats," he said, voice rough with emotion. "It's about remembering our responsibility to each other, especially to those who are wounded, lost, or overlooked. Daisy and Valor showed us that. Now it's our turn to carry it forward." Applause filled the room. Daisy, sitting between Helen and Valor, felt a warm rush of pride. She'd once been the silent girl in the back of the class, afraid to speak up. Now people listened when she spoke. She had become a symbol of resilience and hope. That night, Helen and Daisy sat side by side on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. Valor lay at their feet, head in Daisy's lap. Pep slept in a pile of puppies by the door. "I keep thinking about how everything changed," Daisy said softly. "How we all got hurt. Me, Valor, even you. And somehow, it made us a family." Helen squeezed her hand. "Suffering's like that. It cracks you open, but it also makes room for new things to grow. The hardest part is being willing to see someone else's pain, and not turning away." Daisy nodded. "I want to help other kids like me. Kids who are scared or lonely, or think nobody will notice if they disappear." Helen kissed her temple, pride and sorrow mingling in her heart. "And you will. That's the lesson of all this, isn't it? That we owe it to each other. To see, to care, to act." As darkness settled, Daisy's gratitude journal sat open on her knees, the last entry glowing in lamplight. True healing is when we let someone see us, and we dare to see them too. Crescent Falls, once fractured, felt more whole than ever before. There would always be wounds, old scars that might never fully heal, but now there was a promise, quietly kept by everyone who had come together, to build something kinder, stronger, and safer for animals and people alike. Helen closed her eyes, Dennis's memory gentle and warm at her side. "You choose your family," she thought, "and if you're lucky, your family chooses you back." Christmas arrived in Crescent Falls with a hush of snow, soft as a secret. Helen's cottage, once a place of quiet routine and lingering sadness, now brimmed with warmth and laughter. Light spilled from the windows, painting the drifts outside in gold. A pine wreath hung on the door, stitched with red ribbon and pine cones that Daisy and the neighborhood kids had gathered from the woods. Inside, the air was scented with cinnamon and roasting apples, and the fireplace crackled with stories. On Christmas Eve, the family gathered, Helen, Daisy, Valor, Pep, and the rest of the puppies, plus a handful of new friends who had become part of their circle. Dr. Faulkner, Mrs. Kellerman, and the Harrison boys, who, after months of community service, now knelt on the floor to rub Valor's belly and hand out biscuits to the puppies. Even John Porter, Daisy's father, had come from Winston to visit, quieter and humbler than before, but welcome all the same. The cottage glowed with more than holiday lights. It pulsed with the hard-won joy of second chances. After supper, Daisy sat on the rug by the fire, her gratitude journal open in her lap. She smoothed a page, looking up at Helen. "Can I read something?" she asked, voice shy but steady. Helen smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. We'd love that." Daisy began, her voice wavering just a little. "This year, I learned that family isn't just who you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you're hurt, who hold your hand when you're scared, who listen even when you have nothing to say. I learned that a broken dog can save a broken girl, and that when you help someone else, you help yourself too. I'm grateful for every second chance, every hard day, every friend who didn't turn away. I hope if anyone listening feels alone, you'll remember this. There's always someone who needs you. You just have to look." There was a hush as she finished, the kind that falls when the truth has settled deep. Dr. Faulkner dabbed at his eyes, and Mrs. Kellerman squeezed Daisy's shoulder. John Porter cleared his throat, pride shining through the awkwardness. Helen felt tears burn her own eyes, tears not just of sorrow or relief, but of gratitude, pure and whole, for all the unlikely roads that had led them to this moment. Later, as the fire burned low and the puppies napped in a tangled heap, Helen watched Daisy and Valor curled up together on the sofa. Valor's scars were faded, her eyes soft and bright. She lay with her head on Daisy's lap, utterly at peace. Pep snored softly at their feet, a steady rhythm that echoed the simple miracle of survival. Helen settled into her favorite chair, gazing at the circle of faces, human and animal, that now filled her life. She thought of Dennis, her late husband, and how she'd once believed her best days had ended with him. Now she saw the truth in every corner of this house. Loss had planted the seeds for something unexpected and beautiful. Suffering, she realized, was not just an ending, but a beginning, if met with courage, honesty, and the willingness to open one's heart again. She stood and crossed the room, opening the door to the cold night. Snow drifted in, and for a moment, all was silent, but for the distant hum of carols from a neighbor's radio. Helen turned to Daisy, Valor, and the others. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice carrying in the hush, "about how many animals and people still need someone to notice them. We have room for one more, don't we?" Daisy's eyes lit up. "We always do," she whispered. Together they stepped out onto the porch, welcoming the crisp air and the wide, starlit sky. Tomorrow, Helen would call the animal shelter and volunteer to foster another dog in need. Daisy would help organize the Animal Welfare League's winter blanket drive. The circle would widen, as it always should. As they stood beneath the stars, Helen pressed her hand gently to Daisy's back. "If this story means anything," she said, voice soft but clear, "it's that none of us are alone unless we choose to be. And there is always something you can do to make the world a little kinder, just by answering the call." Daisy nodded, hope shimmering in her eyes. "We can't save everyone," she said, "but we can save someone." Helen smiled. "That's how it starts. One act of kindness, then another. That's how you change a life. And maybe, if we're lucky, a whole town." The next morning, as Crescent Falls woke under a white sky, Helen, Daisy, and Valor set out for the shelter, ready to begin the cycle again. The porch light glowed behind them, a beacon for anyone lost or looking for a sign that, yes, good things were still possible. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Every act of kindness can change a life. Who around you needs rescuing? And what might happen if you answer that call?